So today we welcome Mr. James Taylor. He is the president of the Heartland Institute based in Chicago to come and share with us some insights from their research, and they are at the very forefront of this particular debate, and also in light of God's mandate on creation care. And James is a Christian, and he can speak from that perspective as well. James has presented energy and environmental analysis on every major television network in the United States and at conferences in the Americas and Europe. He also organizes Heartland's international conferences on climate change. He is the former managing editor of Environment and Climate News, a national monthly publication devoted to sound science and free market environmentalism, and he's also a columnist on the Forbes.com website. Mr. Taylor received his bachelor's degree from Dartmouth College, where he studied atmospheric science and majored in government. He received his JD, Juris Doctorate degree from Syracuse University. So without further ado, let's welcome Mr. James Taylor.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. So I'm told that the majority of students here you're here on your own accord. You're not being forced to attend. So let me be the first to say you are all better than me. I'd like to be able to say that when I was in college on a Friday afternoon, if there was a speaker, no matter how interested I was in the topic, no matter how prominent the speaker, I'd like to be able to say that I would be like you. I'd be here watching the session, but I have to be honest, I probably wouldn't be. So I greatly appreciate the fact that you're here and that you're giving up your time. There's so many other things that you can be doing, and yet you've chosen to be here. So thank you so much, and I'm going to do my best to make it worth your while, worth your time to be here. So when I lived in Florida, my pastor would often say to me, James, you're doing the Lord's work. And my response would be, I hope so. In Scripture, I have yet to find anything on climate change, whether that's a crisis, not a crisis, whatever else. But nevertheless, we do know that our Lord is a God of truth. And therefore, if we're pursuing truth, if we are conveying truth as best we can, then we're honoring God, and I think he will look upon us favorably. Now, of course, some people think they're spreading truth when maybe they aren't, but if we pursue the truth, and if we're doing our best to convey that, then I believe that we are indeed doing the Lord's work. And I like being praised by my pastor, but really that's what it boils down to. Are we discussing truth? And indeed, in Psalm 15, it says, Lord, who may dwell in your sacred tent? Who may live on your holy mountain? The one whose walk is blameless, who does what is righteous, who speaks the truth from their heart. Also, 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 through 6. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. When you're speaking the truth, when you're pursuing the truth, you're embodying love. And of course, John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Think about that for a minute. Describing Jesus Christ so succinctly, what are the words that are chosen? The way, the truth, and the life. So my goal is to discern, discover, and convey the truth as best I can. And hopefully I do so, in which case I believe the Lord will look favorably upon me. And for you in the audience, whatever topic it may be, that is something I hope will be inspirational. If you're pursuing truth, you're honoring God. And sometimes we're going to have different versions on what the truth is, and it's good to question, to challenge with love, with respect. Iron sharpens iron. But in this way, I believe, and I certainly hope that we're honoring God today. I'm going to do my best. So, talking about science, the scientific background regarding climate change. If there is just one single slide, chart, or one single point that I make regarding this debate, I hope you'll remember this one. and that is that you cannot have a climate crisis when temperatures are unusually cool, not hot. Let me repeat, you cannot have a climate crisis when temperatures are unusually cool. The whole basis of the so-called climate crisis is that through our carbon dioxide emissions, we are heating the Earth at an unprecedented rate, at an unprecedented pace, in an unprecedented amount, such that we are destroying the Earth. We've never seen anything like this before. This chart here, this was produced by scientists with the European Science Foundation. This is data from the Greenland Ice Core project. Scientists drilled down into the Greenland ice sheet. Then when they pull up the ice core, they were able to measure temperature going far back in time. It's funny, when I presented this slide, my pastor at the time, who is a young Earth advocate, said, James, that chart is going back 10,000, 100,000 years. And I said, Pastor Bruce, for purposes of climate change discussion, I'm not going to get into young Earth versus old Earth, but this is the stage, this is the venue that we debate the science on. So let's take the scientific notion that's presented to us to say we're facing a climate crisis. So scientists measuring the ice core, going back on the top left, you see a chart of the past 100,000 years. On the top right is temperatures of the past 10,000 years. At the bottom, temperatures of the past 2,000 years. I'd like you to look right now at the chart at the top right. So on that chart, on the far left, right there, these are temperatures 10,000 years ago. As we came out of the last ice age, temperatures 8,000 years ago were approximately 2.5, 3 degrees Celsius warmer than they are today. Here at the far right, these are temperatures today. What's interesting is you can see that throughout most of the past, well, certainly the past 6,000 years, the period of human civilization, temperatures have been significantly warmer than today for almost all that time. This little squiggle at the end, this is all of the warming of the past 150 years. This is what we're told we need to panic about. And yet temperatures still remain unusually cool. For most of human civilization, when people had far less technology than we do today, temperatures were substantially warmer than today. You can't have a climate crisis when temperatures are unusually cool, not warm. Indeed, the bottom chart, you see temperatures of the past 2,000 years. At the far right, again, you see temperatures of today. Look back just 1,000 years ago. This was the medieval warm period, when settlers were able to establish bases, establish villages in Greenland. As a little bit of the Greenland ice sheet melts now, it's revealing whole villages that were covered in snow and ice because temperatures got so cold. We're finally getting a little bit back of that warmth. Again, temperatures today are unusually cool, not warm. The second chart, this is produced by the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Their own charts, their own reports agree. Again, look at the middle chart. That's temperatures of the past 10,000 years. Again, we see the same information. On the far right is temperatures of today, very little warming of the past 150 years compared to what humans have experienced over the past several thousand years. On the bottom chart, you see temperatures going back in the past 1,000 years. And what's interesting is take a look at the temperature of the past 500 years or so. Notice how temperatures bottomed out around the year 1600. You had a step increase, then they plateaued for another 200 years, and then a little warming during the 20th century. Keep in mind that the warming that we're experiencing, the warming is merely a recovery from those exceedingly cold temperatures. And if temperatures had continued to cool as they were doing through the 1600s, we'd be in a lot of trouble right now as far as life on Earth goes. Now, what is the reason why temperatures are warming? Throughout human history, throughout recent global history, the primary driver has been the sun. Now, this chart, it measures solar irradiance on 3 different wavelengths. This chart and this data were published in the peer-reviewed science journal, Geophysical Research Letters, perhaps the most prestigious and respected scientific journal on earth sciences topics in the world. And scientists went back and they were able to examine solar output going back to the year 1600. And take a look at what they discovered. You see that there's a minimal of solar output. The sun doesn't present the same amount of energy all the time. It varies in how much energy it produces, how much energy is reaching the Earth and heating the Earth. So during the 1600s, solar energy was at a minimum. Then there was a step increase, and then solar energy plateaued for about 200 years, and then solar energy increased significantly during the past 100 years. Does that remind you of anything? Remember this chart at the bottom? It is a near exact match. Temperatures of the past 500 years versus versus solar output. Now, it doesn't mean that carbon dioxide cannot warm the planet, but what it tells us is that throughout history, it has been the sun that has been by far the dominant factor driving temperature change, and continues to be so today, continues to be so during our 20th century and now 21st century global warming. It mirrors almost exactly solar output with temperature. Now, temperatures here on the far right, you have a chart. This is from satellite instruments that have been orbiting the Earth since 1979, and they have been precisely measuring temperature increases. What's interesting is in 1990, the very first United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report predicted that there would be 0.3 degrees Celsius of warming per decade moving forward. 3 degrees Celsius of temperature increase over a century, 0.3 per decade. But what's happened is we see in the chart that the pace of warming has been at about 0.14 degrees Celsius per decade. In other words, a little less than half of what was predicted. And it underscores the fact that just because somebody makes a prediction, no matter how intelligent, no matter how informed, it's still a prediction. And when we have data to test the prediction, the hypothesis, of course, the facts overrule the prediction if they differ. Now, at the very end, you see a temperature increase, a significant temperature increase over the past year and a half or so. There are two factors for that. Number one, we are currently in the second strongest El Nino. The El Nino, of course, when the Pacific Ocean, the eastern Pacific Ocean gets much warmer, it has global implications. The second warmest El Nino of this current century. But even more importantly, scientists have discovered, and it's been reported in the peer-reviewed literature, that at the bottom here, I'm going to read a quote from Nature Communications, May of 2024, so just a few months ago. In 2020, fuel regulations abruptly reduced the emission of sulfur dioxide, which is a cooling agent, cooling gas. Reduced the emission of sulfur dioxide from international shipping by about 80% and created an inadvertent geoengineering termination shock with global impact. The warming effect is consistent with the recent observed strong warming in 2023 and expected to make the 2020s anomalously, in other words, unusually, warm. The forcing is equivalent in magnitude to 80% of the measured increase in planetary heat uptake since 2020. So what we have seen is that throughout the temperature record, temperatures in the real world have only warmed about half as much as the United Nations has predicted. We hear a lot in the media about the spike in the last year and a half, but there are reasons for it that's been reported in the scientific peer-reviewed literature that have nothing to do with carbon dioxide. This graph was presented by John Christie. He is a scientist at the University of Alabama, Huntsville. He is one of the two people who developed the instrumentation that's able to measure global temperatures from satellites. And what you see in the red line, that's the average of the chart, the average of the temperature models that the United Nations uses to predict temperature increase. So going back to the 1970s, their models have predicted the red line, they've predicted that much warming. The green line is the amount of warming that's been observed in the real world. So again, if you hear something like scientists say that this will happen, scientists predict that, keep in mind that their predictions have overstated the warming that's occurred by a factor of 2. It's doubled the increase from what really has occurred. This chart is also very important, and I hope you'll remember this as you think back on this presentation. This chart was presented by Dr. Will Happer and Dr. Richard Lindzen. Dr. Will Happer is a Cyrus Fogg Professor of Physics at Princeton. It is one of the most prestigious chairs, scientific chairs in the world. He is the one, by the way, who developed back in the 1980s the ability, this Strategic Defense Initiative, the ability to shoot down missiles from Russia that was all ridiculed. Star Wars, you can never do that. Well, actually, he was brilliant enough, he was able to do that. He's had all sorts of other accomplishments. Dr. Richard Lindzen's the Alfred Sloan meteorologist at MIT, again, one of the most prestigious chairs in science. And basically what they've done is they presented this chart that shows the blue line that you see at the top, the curved line. That is how much radiation would be emitted back into space if we did not have a greenhouse effect, if we did not have atmospheric gases that trap some of the solar energy after it strikes the Earth. Now, beneath that, what you see is how much energy is actually making it back into space with the greenhouse gases trapping them. So that black jagged line. Now what's very interesting is that there are different ranges of the spectrum that different greenhouse gases affect. You see H2O, water, you see carbon dioxide, others. And what you see in this chart that they present that's so very important, you see the bright green line. That is how much energy would escape back into space if there was no carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The black squiggly line underneath that, so this here is how much would get back into space without carbon dioxide. This black line is how much goes back into space when carbon dioxide levels are at 400 parts per million. So you see that there is a significant amount of carbon dioxide greenhouse trapping. But what's very interesting is the red line, which is almost exactly the same as the black line, that's how much carbon dioxide traps when it's at 800 parts per million. It's the law of diminishing returns. Almost the entirety of the ability of carbon dioxide to trap heat here in the Earth's atmosphere has already been utilized. It's been used up. In other words, carbon dioxide levels right now are at about 420, 430 parts per million. If it goes up to 600, even 800 parts per million, it's going to have virtually no impact on temperatures moving forward. Whatever impact there has been, which is still not as significant as the sun's output and changes in the sun's energy, but it's already been used up. There is no future carbon dioxide crisis to worry about, no warming crisis caused by human emissions. What you see in this chart, this is temperature data going back to January of 2005. This is a chart that I cut and pasted directly from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, their website. Since 2005, NOAA, as it's called, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, has implemented a series, 114 I believe is the number, of temperature stations that are not corrupted by urban heat influences, not corrupted by any other factors. We have the most pristine, accurate temperature measurement throughout the United States going back now 20 years. What you see is there has been no warming, zero, none, since we've been able to accurately measure throughout the United States. I presented the global data from the satellite instruments a few slides ago. There hasn't been any. If you hear in the media, because of climate change, fish are no longer to live in Montana streams because the streams have been too warm. Apples can no longer grow in Wisconsin because it's too warm, or whatever they say, that is bogus. We know for a fact it's been measured throughout the United States. There has been no warming for 20 years at least. If they're talking about some climate change impacts, some warming impacts, they must be talking about something that happened before most of you were even born, or at least many of you were born. Some specific topics, hurricanes. We had the tragic hurricane that struck the Big Bend area of Florida. I spent most of my life in Florida. I know it well. That has caused a lot of people to say climate change is to blame. Here's another example, illustration of climate change and its horrible impacts. This data, this chart, is taken from Dr. Ryan Maui. He's a meteorologist who specializes in hurricanes. He worked closely with folks at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. The top blue dots, on the far left is 1980, on the far right is today. Those blue dots is the number of hurricanes that have existed in the world during the past 45 years. Do you see a trend of dramatically increasing or even increasing at all hurricanes? No, it's just the opposite. Hurricanes are becoming less frequent as temperatures warm. The bottom is major hurricanes. Now, the major hurricanes, you see no change for the past 40 plus years. No decrease, not as, we have a significant decrease for overall hurricanes, but no increase either. So when people say that global warming, climate change supercharged this hurricane or that hurricane or made it more likely, well, by the data, that's not the case. Because if that were the case, we would see a significant increase in hurricanes and major hurricanes. And it's simply not the case. If there's been no increase, you can't blame the ones that occur on climate change. What's interesting is this data here goes back, it starts in 1980. This chart here, it's probably a little hard for you to see out there because there's 4 charts in some language, but this is from the science journal, peer-reviewed journal Nature. It's a study published in 2022. Scientists they were able to go back and look at records for hurricanes globally, and then northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere, but going back to the mid-1800s. So on the top left, that chart is the number of hurricanes going back that far. So right here, this is the 1850s. This is how often hurricanes would occur. Here is our era of climate change, warming temperatures. Hurricane activity has decreased dramatically, and there's a reason for that. In the media, you'll be given the message that hurricanes require warm temperatures, warm water. So if you get warmer water, you get more hurricanes. That sounds reasonable, except there are other factors involved. Scientists have discovered that with a warmer atmosphere, we have more upper atmospheric wind shear that cuts across the tops of the hurricane clouds as they form, that kill off the hurricanes. So yeah, the warming temperatures may be a factor that might influence hurricanes to make them more frequent or more powerful, but the greater factor that's being caused by more atmospheric warming is more wind shear that is causing fewer hurricanes to form and cutting off the ones that would otherwise become major hurricanes. So that goes back over 150 years. Tornadoes. This chart is cut and pasted from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's own site, going back to 1970. This is F3 or stronger. These are the tornadoes that level towns, that kill people in large amounts. What you see is a dramatic decrease in the frequency of strong tornadoes as temperatures have warmed. Drought. This chart cut and pasted from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's own website. Notice how I'm not giving you numbers or data from the Heartland Institute or some other place. It's the federal government's own data or its peer-reviewed studies in the most prestigious scientific journals. What you see in this chart is NOAA has gone back to 1895, and they've been able to create a chart of how much of the country is experiencing very wet or very dry conditions. And so the green bars here at the top, this measures how much of the country is very wet. So this is the 20% level, 40%, 60%. And what you see is essentially no change in the percentage of the country that's experiencing very wet conditions. When you hear sometimes about, oh, because of climate change, there's more moisture in the clouds, there's more soaking rains, there's more catastrophic flooding. Absolutely not. We have data on this. It's not the case. But this is even more compelling. The yellow bars are the percentage of the country that's very dry. And by the way, those are terms that NOAA utilizes. They have a formula that says this is very wet, this is very dry. So this line would be 20% of the country very dry. Here is when 40% of the country is very dry, 60%. The further down the bar goes, the higher the percentage of the country that's very dry. Look at this. In the first, going up through about 1950 or so, it was a regular occurrence that 40% and much more of the country was experiencing very dry conditions. Regular occurrence. Here we are today, when we're being told in the media and by climate activists that climate change is causing more drought. Look, the Earth's a big place. There's going to be drought somewhere all the time. So wherever it occurs, they send the video cameras and they film people that are suffering, and it's a horrible story. But the fact of the matter is, it's not caused by climate change because it's happening far less frequently, far less percentage than used to be the case. Again, that's the objective data. Drought is not getting worse. Neither are very wet conditions. This chart on the right, again, cut and pasted from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's own website. That's their logo. NOAA went back and examined precipitation trends going back to 1895. The very few spaces where you see yellow or red coloration, those are parts of the country where there has been a decrease in precipitation. They're almost non-existent. The gray areas are essentially the same amount of precipitation. All of the green you see, those are areas where we have more precipitation over the past 130 years. When we are told that climate change is causing drought, less rainfall, it's simply not true. Indeed, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has observed this, and they say not just for the United States, but globally. For globally, they report with, quote, high confidence that precipitation has increased over mid-latitude land areas of the Northern Hemisphere, including the United States, during the past 70 years, while IPCC has, quote, low confidence about any trends of any kind elsewhere. So basically, the mid-latitudes in the Northern Hemisphere, which it tends to be where a large percentage of population is, we've seen an increase in precipitation, not drought, not less precipitation. And for the rest of the world, they don't see any trends. Don't let people tell you that climate change is causing more drought. Also, here in the United States, my goodness, what we've benefited from with more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and warmer temperatures. USA Today, April 27th, 2017, just recently, they're quoting NOAA officials and data. Drought in the U.S. fell to a record low this week, with just 6.1% of the lower 48 states currently experiencing dry conditions, federal officials announced Thursday. So in 2017, we had the lowest percentage of the country ever recorded experiencing drought. And then just 2 years later, in April 2019, according to the NOAA press release, in April 2019, drought conditions had reached a low, so a new low, of just 2.3%. If there is a drought somewhere in the country, there's been a little bit in the Southwest, and they try to blame climate change? Absolutely not. As temperatures warm, we see much less drought throughout the country and throughout the world. Wildfires. It's another one we hear in the news. Whenever a wildfire breaks out, we're told it's climate change. This chart on the right, that's cut and pasted directly from NASA's own website. This is their chart utilizing data that they've been able to measure precisely with satellites in space. They can measure the amount of land that's experiencing wildfires. What you see in the red and orange is areas with an increase in wildfires. In blue is an area of decrease, and that goes back to 1998. What you see is a significant decrease in the amount of wildfires globally. According to their website, globally, the total acreage burned by fires each year declined by 24% between 1998 and 2015. And I look forward to them publishing updated data from then, since then, which I assume will follow the same trend. I suspect they haven't published it because it's kind of embarrassing when their NASA staff, their bureaucracy, says climate change is causing more wildfires, and yet we know for a fact from the satellite instruments we're getting less wildfire. By the way, that's going back to 1998. In the peer-reviewed science journal, Geophysical Research, scientists went back to wildfire records going back to the year 1901, so throughout the 20th century. What they find is that the average global burned area is, and you see the numbers, during 1901 to 2007, and our results suggest a notable declining rate of burned area globally. So even before wildfires declined by 24%, they had declined even more significantly in the century before that, again, during the period of global warming climate change. Warmer temperatures do not equate to more wildfires. What we see is the exact opposite, fewer wildfires as temperatures warm. Some more benefits of more atmospheric carbon dioxide and our recent warming. This is global crop production. This chart is cut and pasted directly from the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. I updated their chart because they update it every month. I cut and pasted it last night and put it into this presentation. What you see is cereal crops. These are the big three: corn, rice, wheat. These are the staples of food production and consumption around the world. And what you see on the far left, the 2014-15 growing season, on the far right, 24-25 growing season. What you see is a significant, consistent increase in global crop production. What's ironic, well, actually, I'll get to it in a little bit, some ironic facts about that. But keep in mind that as temperatures have increased, more carbon dioxide, longer growing seasons. Horticulturists pump carbon dioxide into greenhouses where they grow plants because it's aerial fertilizer. Fewer frost events. All of that means we're getting more crop production, not less. Here's another one I hope you'll remember. This data is taken from The Lancet, peer-reviewed medical science publication. And scientists studied mortality data throughout the world. What they found is that more than 7% of deaths globally are caused by temperatures that are not ideal. They're temperatures that are harmful to humans or create the harm. Now that sounds scary, but look at the actual findings when you dig down deeper. What they did is they looked at, and you see a sampling of countries, about a dozen of them, but it's representative of the global results of their finding. The blue bars, the dark blue on the far left for each country, that's the number of people who die because of extreme cold. The light blue is the number of people who die because of moderate cold, persistent moderate cold. The pink are the number of people who die due to moderate heat. The dark red, the number of people who died due to extreme heat. What they found is that by a nearly 20-to-1 ratio, more people die because of cold than heat. As temperatures warm, we are reducing this substantial amount, millions of people who are dying because of cold temperatures each year. By contrast, very few are dying because of heat. If there's a heat wave and the media says, oh, we had this number of deaths, that is a tragedy, but they don't tell you about the 20 or so times more people who die because of cold, and the fact that as a net, as temperatures warm, we are saving lives by the millions. A few specific instances in the press that I think are worth examining. Here in Texas, I remember Beto O'Rourke making a claim that the reason why we have people crossing the border, a migrant crisis, is because of climate change. Climate change forcing people off their farms, and they have no other choice but to come here. It's our fault. And here's a couple quotes. This is from the UK Guardian, this article that I give you a screenshot. And the title is "The Unseen Driver Behind the Migrant Caravan, Climate Change." In the article at the very top, it says, while violence and poverty have been cited as the reasons for the exodus, experts say the big picture is that changing climate is forcing farmers off their land, and it's likely to get worse. Similarly, NBC News, the title is Central America's Choice, Pray for Rain or Migrate. Quote, Central America's Choice, Pray for Rain or Migrate. Ravaged by drought, farmers in rural Honduras and Guatemala live on the edge of hunger. That was in 2019. In 2019, the lion's share of migrants were coming from Honduras and Guatemala. And according to NBC News, it's because of climate change. They can't grow crops anymore because of climate change. Well, fortunately, you may remember this chart. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization keeps data, very specific data, not just globally, but country by country. So globally, Central America, Honduras, and Guatemala in particular. So what does the data show from the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization? This is crop production in Honduras, where we're told climate change is causing the migration. People are fleeing because they can't eat. What we see is a dramatic increase. On the far left is 1961. On the far right is 2017. What you see is a dramatic increase with new records being set on a regular basis. Now, if you're being sharp and you're saying, but wait a second, James, why does that chart end at 2017? It's 2024. This particular graphic is a very powerful illustration, but the data from the United Nations now goes forward to 2021, not reported in as visually compelling a format. So let's add on. So here's through 2017. Now here's 2014 through 2021, so you see the trend continues. There's been a dramatic increase in crop production in Honduras. It's not climate change driving migrants because they have no choice because they can't eat. There are other factors. There's violence, there's gang activity, there's totalitarian governments. And when we blame climate change and ignore the real causes, all we're doing is harming the people who are being forced to flee those conditions because we're not addressing the root causes. We're blaming climate change. It's a scapegoat for politicians and their failed policies, and it's harming people's lives. Guatemala, the same thing, 1961 to 2017, you see a significant, consistent increase in crop production. 2014 to 2021, continuing that trend. It's not climate change. It's because of other conditions that we're ignoring by falsely blaming climate change. Throughout Central and South America, the same thing. Here's crop production in Costa Rica, Ecuador, Nicaragua, Panama, Mexico. Everywhere you see an increase in crop production. It's not climate change. Don't let people blame climate change. Don't let people who hear the news reports and then say, see, everyone knows it's because of crop failures due to climate change. No, it's not. By the way, here's the United States also. I was watching the vice presidential debate the other night, and Governor Walz was talking about how farmers know. Farmers are suffering from climate change. They're seeing their crops ravaged, and they have no other place to turn. Well, no, they're not. Crop production is increasing dramatically, consistently, and continues to do so. All right, going back to that UN chart. This is really interesting. The United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in 1990 said, quote, patterns of agricultural trade could be altered by decreased cereal production in some of the currently high production areas. Instead, we're getting record crop production, new records set nearly every year. Even as recently as 2015, again at the very beginning of this chart on the far left, the UN says climate-related impacts are already reducing crop yields in some parts of the world. I don't know, I guess there may be some small part of the world where something's going on, but as a whole, we see a significant increase in crop production. Just because a so-called expert tells you something is going to happen, or even is happening, look at the data, because the data don't lie. Texas, here in Texas, it's important to keep up with what is being asserted about climate change here and what's really happening. On the left, it's a Washington Post article. This was after the extreme cold that hit a couple of winters ago. The title is Climate Change May Have Worsened Deadly Texas Cold Wave, New Study Suggests. So it's not just the Washington Post saying that, but new study suggests, so you know that there are experts who say this. Then, more recently, from The Guardian, the title is Current Heat Waves Across U.S. South Made 5 Times More Likely by Climate Crisis. So from what you hear, climate change is making cold waves more frequent and severe, heat waves more frequent and severe. You may have heard terms like climate whiplash, climate weirding. They want you to believe now we're just oscillating rapidly, tremendously back and forth. And these two articles particular to Texas. Let's look at the facts. This is from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. It's their own chart. These are the numbers of extremely cold days in Texas. The bars that you see on the far left, these are 5-year periods, starting in 1900 through 1904. At the very right, you've got 2015 through 2020. Shortly, at the end of 2025, we'll get a new bar. But what you see, this is the number of times that we have extreme cold in Texas. Do you see any increase whatsoever in that? No, you do not. So when we had the cold snap a couple of years ago, as horrible as it was, when they blame it on climate change, they're not telling the truth. If we're caused by climate change, then we should be seeing more of these events. But we're not seeing that. By the way, that's Texas. If we were to look at, and I put together the numbers for Louisiana, Oklahoma, Arkansas, for those states, as a whole, the number is decreasing significantly. Here it's about the same, but again, no increase. Extremely hot temperatures. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's own chart. Again, on the far left, 1900, 1904, and the far right is today. What you see is that for the first half of the 20th century, 1900 through 1950, we had significantly more heat waves, extreme hot temperatures, than we do today. Temperatures have modestly warmed, but they're modestly warming mainly because we have fewer extremely cold winter nights. It's not because there's more heat waves. And there's the data right there. When a heat wave comes, and look, through every 5-year period, there have been some heat waves. A heat wave's going to come again next year, the year after, could be a severe one. When they blame climate change, say, where's the increase? These have always happened, and there's fewer now than there used to be. There's the extremely cold temperatures. Didn't I just hit that? I went the wrong direction, I think. There we go. These clickers are James Taylor proofed, I think. Here's precipitation. You see in Texas, there's been no decline in precipitation. When a drought hits, they're going to blame climate change. But yet, we've seen a modest increase in precipitation. This is National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's own data. I'm going to skip Florida hurricanes so I have more time for Q&A, but it mirrors what I showed you for hurricanes globally. There's been no increase. In fact, there's been somewhat of a decrease. In fact, Florida has recently gone through, very recently, in the past decade or so, some of its quietest hurricane periods in recorded history. It was only a matter of time before in Hurricane Alley that a strong hurricane would strike again. And I would tell people they're going to blame climate change, even though hurricanes are far less frequent and severe in Florida than they used to be. This is important for students here at Houston Christian University. Oftentimes people will say, well, but even if you think we're not facing a climate crisis, isn't it good to be environmentally conscious? Shouldn't we be taking some actions regardless? Don't we have a duty to care for God's creation? And we do have a stewardship obligation. In fact, I was reading this morning after I put the slide together, the slide presentation during the past week. This morning I was reading your 10 pillars. And pillar number 5 was that we have a mandate to understand the world. And so that's why I presented the data, so you'll have an understanding of the climate change issue. But there's also a stewardship mandate. Genesis 2:15. The Lord God then took the man and settled him in the Garden of Eden to cultivate and care for it. Of course, not to leave it alone, not to not touch it, to cultivate it and care for it. And that obligation persists today. Creation care theology is something that sometimes we hear about in theological discussions. This is a quote from the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. We show our respect for the Creator by our stewardship of creation. Care for the earth is not just an Earth Day slogan, it is a requirement of our faith. We're called to protect people and the planet, living our faith in relationship with all of God's creation. That's a summary of creation care. I might say that I see it more as the last sentence. We're called to stewardship for the planet as opposed to protect, because we are given the instructions to cultivate. But regardless, creation care theology. But the point is we should be caring for our environment, God's creation. And it's important to remember that environmentalism is more than carbon dioxide emissions. As we've seen today, as I hope that you've seen, we're not causing a climate crisis. Carbon dioxide emissions are not harmful to breathe, they're odorless, they're colorless. If they're not causing a climate crisis, that's not an environmental factor to speak of. When I was a kid growing up, the big environmental issue, the imperative was land preservation, preserving species. And that fits right in with creation care theology and basically our obligation to be good stewards of the planet. Yet the so-called solutions to climate change, I believe, are far more harmful to the environment. And if we look at things through a creation care prism, more violative of that. So on the left, you see a photograph. This is a vulture that was struck to death by wind turbines. Back when wind turbines powered just 1% of our electricity, now it's up over 5%, but back when it was just 1%, peer-reviewed study, scientists went out and did field research, counted carcasses. By the way, those are just the carcasses they found, not ones that would have been scavenged by coyotes or something else before they found them. What they found is that wind turbines kill 1.5 million birds and bats each year in this country. 1.5 million. By the way, they're also killing endangered right whales off the shore of the Northeast Atlantic. They create aerial no-fly zones where they exist. And if we were to replace coal, oil, natural gas with wind turbines, scientists at Harvard University who believe in a climate crisis, they decided to take a look. How many wind turbines do we need to replace conventional energy? What they found is that we would have to cover literally 1/3 of America's landmass with wind turbines to replace conventional power. When people rail about how evil the coal and natural gas and oil industries are for their environmental impact, the replacement is far worse. 1/3 of our nation, forest leveled, open spaces, now developed, birds and bats slaughtered across the board. There'd be nothing left of our natural or near natural environment. And by the way, if we electrify transportation, now that becomes 50% of our landmass. That's a huge environmental harm. On the right, this is a photograph of people in Congo that are mining for cobalt, and there's also rare earth mines in various places in the third world. These are critical for wind turbines and solar panels. They are among the most environmentally devastating practices on the planet. There's a reason why you don't see cobalt mines and rare earth mines here in the United States, because we wouldn't put up with the environmental devastation. But we export that misery and that environmental devastation to third world nations so that we can have our beloved wind and solar power, even though there's not a climate crisis. By the way, for electric vehicles, peer-reviewed study came out earlier this year. Because the vehicles are so heavy, the batteries are so heavy, that what happens is tires wear out much more quickly. And those tires have all sorts of synthetic chemicals, all sorts of toxins in them. What they found is that electric vehicles create far more air pollution and health harms than gasoline-powered automobiles. But it's become doctrine for the climate activist crowd to be supporting electric vehicles. And yet our air quality gets much worse because of it, and people are dying as a result. Those are just a few of the issues. I could present many more. But you see that there's much more to environmentalism than simply carbon dioxide emissions. So, in just a minute, I have some time for questions and answers, but I want you to be aware of this. This is climateataglance.com. This is a book right here. We at the Heartland Institute publish this. We have summaries, 30 topics related to climate change, so hurricanes, tornadoes, droughts, coral reefs, polar bears, you name it. 2-page summaries, a few bullet points, friendly graphic. Here I just happened to get onto U.S. high temperatures. But when you have questions, when people have questions, you can find it at climateataglance.com. You can buy this copy for free, for $10 on Amazon. I'm going to leave you a copy here for your university for free. You can get this copy digitally for free, climateataglance.com. We also have an app that you can download for free. If you search for Climate at a Glance, the app on your cell phone, you can pull up much of the information that I presented. You have at your fingertips. There's a screenshot of our Climate at a Glance website with the various, here's 3 of the topics where we give you the summaries. ClimateRealism.com, we at the Heartland Institute, we publish this, we update it every day, whatever the media story is. Today it would be probably the hurricane and how it was caused by climate change. We'll debunk it. This one I took a screenshot, this was a couple months ago, the places in the U.S. most at risk for extreme rainfall, and we show what the facts are. So on a day-to-day basis, whatever's in the news, and if it pops up in conversations with your friends, go to climaterealism.com, you'll get the actual data. So with that, thank you very much. I welcome questions. I especially welcome questions that challenge anything that I say, because if you have differences of opinion and I don't get a chance to address them, then that's no good for either of us. But thank you so much, and I welcome your questions. And don't be shy. I love questions. I love critical questions. Microphone will be there in just a moment.
Comment on the decay of the Great Barrier Reef off the coast of Australia.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. And that's one of the topics that we cover in Climate at a Glance. If you have downloaded the app in the past minute or two since I mentioned it, you can pull it up yourself, or at least some of the information. We hear a lot about how coral reefs are in danger. I think the United Nations a few years ago in their report said that 99+% are going to die off by the year 2050. The Great Barrier Reef being the poster child for it. Sometimes there will be bleaching for coral reefs. It happens all over the world for a number of reasons. When it happens, climate change is to blame. And in fact, I may even have some slides on that. There we go. So you can find this in Climate at a Glance. First of all, coral reef require warm water. The warmer the water is, the more coral you're going to have. This is a chart from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's website. Where you see the dots, that's where you have coral. You see that they are concentrated around the equator. There is no place in the world where the water is too warm for coral reefs. Where the water is warmest, you have more reefs. When there have been coral reef die-offs, scientists in the past few years have discovered that the primary reason why the Great Barrier Reef was affected was because of sunscreen. There was a chemical in sunscreen, commonly found in sunscreen, that is absolutely lethal to coral. In the past few years, since sunscreen has had that product, that chemical eliminated, scientists have reported record numbers of coral. This is from the Australian Institute of Marine Science. In 2021, scientists went out and measured the number of corals in the Great Barrier Reef. On the left is 1985, on the right is 2020, as the chemicals began to be taken away from sunscreen. What they found is that in 2020, despite all the media reports of death of the coral reef, the Great Barrier Reef, due to climate change, scientists recorded the highest number of corals that they had ever found in the Great Barrier Reef. When I say ever found, going back to 1985, but that's how long they've been measured. That was in 2021. Then in 2022, they broke that record by a long shot. So here you see the updated chart. On the far right is the number of coral in the Great Barrier Reef in 2022, a new record. And in 2023, I don't have the chart there, they found the same number, keeping that record intact from what we've seen in 2022. And of course, you still see, this is in 2022, an article, visit the Great Barrier Reef before climate change kills the coral, as coral are at record high. 50% of Earth's coral reefs face climate change threat by 2035. Well, we're seeing exactly the opposite.
Can you comment on what some refer to as chemtrails in the sky or efforts to manipulate the weather?
Yeah, so a topic different than climate change, although I guess sometimes it's tied in together. The notion, the theory is that there is a deliberate release of chemicals and chemtrails from jet aircraft in particular. I'm not that well versed on it. I wouldn't be able to say anything with that I would be comfortable saying, well, this is James Taylor's opinion. So for that, I really don't have an opinion on that. I don't have much knowledge. But thank you. Oh, see, now we're getting more and more hands, but we're getting less and less time.
What do you make of Catherine Hayhoe's work? I mean, given the point of your talk, she kind of argues the exact opposite, also from a theological Christian perspective. So can you just comment on her work?
Sure. Catherine Hayhoe, for those of you who don't know, she was at Texas A&M, I believe. She's a professor of climate science. She even collaborated with Newt Gingrich back when Newt Gingrich was a presidential primary candidate in 2012 or whenever it was. And she believes that we are facing a climate crisis. She mentions faith in there sometimes. What do I think of her? I think it's important for us to be humble and loving. I think in this type of environment, because it's become a political issue and it becomes debate, sometimes it can happen to me. Okay, I'm being challenged, it's a contest, and now whatever. So I'll say that Catherine Hayhoe contacted me personally back 15 years ago, 10 years ago, whenever it was, with a question. And I replied as graciously as I could. It was a challenging question. And then when I said, by the way, I'm glad you contacted me because I have something that's been on my mind. Can you answer this for me? And then I got nothing. I have found, in my opinion, the data that she's presented, I don't think has been accurate. She'd probably say the same thing about me. But I back up everything I say with the objective data. So that being the case, we disagree. And for Catherine Hayhoe and for many other, including some very intelligent scientists who disagree with me, we need to love people we disagree with. We disagree. Thank you for the question.
Question about financing for your studies. Does any of that come from organizations that may benefit from debunking climate crisis?
So certainly the data I presented, all that is official government data or peer-reviewed studies. For the Heartland Institute itself, we receive zero money from the energy sector or anybody who would have a dog in the fight. I actually would hope that. I mean, I think that perhaps they probably should give to us because, look, we're looking out for consumers and individual freedom, but in the process, we're standing up for oil, natural gas, coal, and yet we get nothing from them, and we have to pay bills. It'd be nice if we got it. But no, we get nothing from them. And if we did, in years past, 10, 15, 20 years ago, we received a small amount of money from such industries. But if money was going to influence our work, we'd be on the other side of the topic. So if you look at Nature Conservancy, Greenpeace, World Wildlife Fund, whatever, I mean, their funding is magnitudes higher than mine, than Heartland's. The salary of their executives is much, much higher than mine. And yeah, if we were going for the money, we'd be on the other side.
So where does the funding come from?
Oh, funding comes from individuals, people in this audience. Some of you might say, you know what, I think what James is presenting is necessary for people to hear, and I'm going to send them a donation. And so we have more than 3,000 individuals who donate to us because they like our work. And we have a few foundations, which are large organizations set up by people who are wealthy, and then they say donate to people who share our values, but mostly from individuals who simply like what we do.
Hello. I have a question. If you have any opinions on carbon capture, whether it's atmospheric or petroleum-based, and yeah, just any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and that's a great question because what if I'm wrong? And anybody who says 100% sure they're right, unless it's a matter of scientific law that we know, you have to entertain the notion that you could be wrong. And no matter what side of this discussion debate you're on, you have to entertain that notion. What if I'm wrong? What if the data starts turning and we decide, we see we need to do something? And carbon dioxide capture, when I say carbon capture, it's carbon dioxide, that's the greenhouse gas, common vernacular carbon. But anyway, is a way that we would be able to say, hey, all right, we can capture it either at the production, oil, natural gas, coal, the utilization, say for coal power plants. There's also means in which we can literally suck it out of the atmosphere, and that would have the impact of reducing carbon dioxide and the CO2 effect. Now, keeping in mind the chart that I showed that we've already saturated the amount of warming that CO2 could form, but again, what if I'm wrong? I think we really need to see that we are wrong, that I am wrong, that scientists who agree with me are wrong, of those who do, before going down that path. Because right now it's something that can be done scientifically. It's enormously expensive. And to be honest, as much as I much prefer conventional energy to wind and solar power, really wind and solar, nuclear, hydro, those carbon dioxide-free sources, make more economic sense than CO2 capture. Maybe the science will change. But look, if we're going down that road, I'm not going to say let's just prop up the coal, oil, and natural gas industries by giving them CO2 capture. In that case, no, then it would be more sensible to go to wind and solar in that regard, unless the science and the economics advance to make CO2 capture more feasible.
This isn't a question, it's more of a comment. And my comment is, after decades of deep study in God's Word, the Bible, the truth, hallelujah, that somebody has literally gone to the extent with your scientific knowledge and expertise to document the truth. And this is coming from somebody that's mature with a lot of study of the Bible. I've never read anything about a scientist in the Bible. I've never read anything that indicated climate change, but I do know that times do change based on the Bible. So my comment from my heart, based on faith, is rather than turning to media, particularly liberal media, get into the Bible. Read the Bible from the beginning to the end. In particular, I can suggest a few particular chapters: Daniel, Revelation, Ezekiel, Job. If you're not familiar with those chapters, get familiar, particularly if you're young, because we're talking about your future. And your future is important. Get into the Bible and stay in it until you're thoroughly informed on the truth.
Thank you.
James, I do have a question. Let's say the governments, not just in the United States, but in many different countries, particularly Western Europe, if they go down the path of zero carbon, as like California does mandated, I want to hear what do you think, what would be the ultimate consequences of that policy?
Well, I think that the first consequences are environmental. Ironically enough, as I've demonstrated with some of the examples, there is no such thing as an entirely environmentally benign source of energy and utilization of energy. And I think that the evidence is pretty clear that the so-called solutions to climate change, those energy sources, are far more environmentally harmful. And that would be the case even if we were getting more warming than the data shows, even if there were more harms. I mean, these are tremendous harms. And then the second is economic. And again, I think the environmental is the most important part, but the economic. In Europe, where you have more of these restrictions on conventional energy, the price of gasoline, the price of electricity is much higher. In Germany, it's about 4 times higher than it is here, maybe about 3 times now, because our electricity prices have increased dramatically during the past 4 years with the restrictions imposed upon them. And when we talk about the economics, it's important to realize what the economics mean. It's not like we're Scrooge McDuck just counting all of our gold bars, or what is it in The Simpsons, whoever the character is that owns the nuclear power plant and has all the money, woo-hoo-hoo. I grew up on welfare, raised by a single mother, raising 3 boys in the projects, drinking powdered milk, getting made fun of because I had to wear high waters because we couldn't afford to replace my pants when I outgrew them. And I don't think I was alone in the sense that when costs of anything rise, and in this case electricity, gasoline, it has to come out of somewhere. And there are a lot of people that can afford it and that don't have to worry about it so much. But it really does impact people's lives and impacts our living standards. If my mom, and she would have the envelopes where she would have rent, and she'd put the money in throughout the month to make sure we had the rent. And we were in the projects, but you still had to pay some rent, food, whatever it may be. If what she had expected for electricity prices got higher, well, it's coming out of, what's it coming out of? I mean, are we going to eat even less nutritious food than was the case? Am I not going to go to the dentist for another year? I have a gap right here in my lower teeth because I couldn't get dental care when I was a kid because we were poor and we couldn't afford it. When prices go up, it's not just a greed thing, it's a standard of living thing, and I think that's a very important thing to consider.
Is there anything I can do as a student to combat climate crisis? And then do you think that at one point in time, dealing with climate crisis would go beyond our control, given the the inventions of new technologies and stuff like that?
So I would say as a student, the best thing you can do on this topic or any other topic is to really look into the sources for yourself. I presented data that I think are very powerful, but don't take my word for it. Don't say, hey, James gave a good presentation, so I have no need to look into it. Always look into things, no matter who presents it, and find the data and information yourself and make your best judgment. And for that, then it's up to you to respond how you wish, how you see fit, what you're capable of. As far as globally, because I don't believe there is a climate crisis, I think better activism, if we're worried about the environment, is to fight for clean water, especially in third world countries, is to fight for cleaner soil. Much of the mining for these minerals and metals for wind turbines and solar panels are just devastating, and that's going to be the case for generations, the soil. I'd love to see more activism for that. But again, that's for each of us to decide on our own, and that's great that you're thinking of those things.
James, I guess I'm next. I have the privilege of having attended and graduated from this school, a double major in economics and finance. Spent my life working in the oil and gas industry, in finance. There's a question in here I'll get to in a moment. One of the rigors that we had to do studying in the school of business here was statistics. I remember making an A in that class. It's I tend to remember the classes I made A's in because there weren't very many of them. But the statistics, and I no longer remember the calculations. My point is what do the people who do these models, I'm thinking of hurricanes, we'll hear during the season that there's going to be 15 named storms over the course of a summer. And then we get to the other end, and there's no named storms. And I don't recall if it's 15 to the 15th power or if it's 15 times, but the numbers are just astronomical. Mr. Spock couldn't calculate them.
Yeah.
And yet they seem to come back then with the same models next year and next year with differing results. What do they say about this?
Well, and that's a fantastic illustration of the complexities of the atmosphere, of meteorological patterns, and then climatological patterns. When people talk about with certainty what scientists, the United Nations, say is going to be the case with climate change, when we have a difficult time making a 10-day weather forecast or making the current hurricane forecast. The people who are making those forecasts, they're right sometimes, they're wrong sometimes. There are people on all sides of the climate change debate making them. One of my heroes in science, Bill Gray, who passed away about a decade ago, he was the pioneer for hurricane forecasting. And his protege, William Klotzbach, I think is his name, as well as Joe Bastardi, who you might see on Fox News and Newsmax some. They study and they make their predictions, and they'll tell you there's a lot to take into consideration. They do their best, probably better than I would do making predictions like that, but it just shows the complexities. And when people say the science is settled, I mean, forget all the data that I showed you today, but even just that is an illustration that, of course, we should be investigating the science. We should be questioning people who say that a certain result has already been shown and proven beyond a shadow of a doubt when it hasn't, and we see that just for hurricanes and predictions. Oh, well, you can find me with a microphone or anybody else afterwards, and we can talk. I'm going to leave here a copy of Climate at a Glance for teachers and students if you want to put it in a library or have it around wherever else. And feel free to contact me with any questions that you have, big or small. My contact information is right there, and I'd be happy to hear from you. So thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure.